Hi everybody, how are you doing? I hope you're doing amazing, and if you're not, make it an amazing day. So today with us we have the awesome and amazing Dave Clayton. For the very few people who don't know about Dave Clayton, introduce yourself for the people who don't know.
So I'm a graphic designer, which is something I've been since a kid. It's not a job that I've had since a child, but when I think back to myself as a child and the things that I love doing, I was born a graphic designer and just didn't realise it. And then over time, it's the thing that always keeps drawing me into anything. I'm always drawn to the design. So for the first half of my life, I did standard jobs. I've been in sales and marketing and different things. And I finally found a place where I was comfortable, which was in marketing, a designer in marketing. So for the second half of my life, I've been involved in design and marketing, and I've then started to develop relationships with the best part of my career has been the last 10 years, and I'm 52 now, so okay. Like the best bit of my design life was really...
And you're living it full.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing the podcast, doing classes here, it's so amazing, isn't it?
It's I've got 4 children, and I've got a full-time job, so I'm not self-employed. It's not my own business. Mm-hmm. I actually work for another company, so it's like I get enjoyment and working experiences from my hobby. So this is just the thing I love, and I'm trying to find things that fit in my family life and my work life, where I can bring all this together. And luckily, I went to Adobe Max for the first time a couple of years ago, and I was working for a design agency, and I met the guys from a company called Astute Graphics, and Astute Graphics make the best and only plugins for Adobe Illustrator. Oh, they make Adobe Illustrator.
It's very rare to hear about plugins for Illustrator.
I know. And we are the only company that do an actual suite of plugins, like Topaz, like Nick, purely for designers. And I've been working I met him at Adobe Max, and we started chatting, and I was explaining my background and my experience with NAP, and like Kelvin One. And Nick, who's the owner, contacted me and said, like, I like the cut of your jib. I like the way you are. I'd like you to work for me. And we had a chat, and I became the training manager at Astute Graphics. So my job is to research designers, find ways of how they're using Adobe Illustrator and how our plugins can help them. So it's the perfect job for me because I love the industry, and I've stepped away from being a graphic designer, and now I get to research graphic designer or designers. I get to look at how people use different styles and how they work, and I'm getting a new love for Illustrator again. It's kind of it's always there.
So how long have you been doing Illustrator and computer graphic design? So I just wanted to ask you before this that did you used to do graphic designing before all these softwares came in?
Yes. Yeah.
How did you do it?
With paper. Paper, Letraset, when you get the letter, Letraset paper, cutting out letters from magazine. When I was younger,
he's the real pro, guys. Yeah. He's the real pro.
I used to make
people start with Illustrator and then think they're a graphic designer just because they know they're in the Illustrator program.
It's like photographers.
Exactly.
You speak to photographers and they say, I used to go back in the darkroom and I used to develop all my pictures. Well, I'm like that in graphic design. I started before computers even existed. To a point where a computer being able to do it was beyond my imagination. It was sci-fi. It was Star Trek.
So you used to do sketches and stuff?
So sketches, I used to make little fanzines and comics. And I do a presentation at Photoshop World this year, and there's a slide that I'm repeating for last year. And it was when I was growing up, I wanted to be a kidnapper.
Why is that?
Because
I was not expecting that.
No, because I love the ransom note. And I always thought in every gang, in every time they take someone or do something, someone's job was to make the ransom note, and they had to sit and cut all the letters out. And the ransom note always had completely different letters, different.
Yes,
and I just thought, how cool to be the person whose job that was the only job. So. I used to watch all these old American TV shows.
I wonder how much they pay the ransom.
Yeah, I'd love someone to do a comedy sketch where it's taking ages to do it because the guy's getting really precious about it. So so I started with that. I started cutting things out, and then eventually I got a job at a print company, and it was the first time the Apple Mac came out, the first Apple, and the first colour PC. And there was a piece of software called Quark Express, which was desktop publishing. So I got into magazine design. My start was desktop publishing, which was creating magazines and flyers and that kind of thing. And I used that for a couple of years. And then my introduction to actual computer graphics was Paint Shop Pro. So I used Paint Shop. I learned my Photoshop skills in Paint Shop Pro. And then eventually one day I got my hands on Photoshop 4. And
that was early.
Someone lent me a copy and said, if you like that, try this. And I tried it, and it, to use a cliche, it does blow your mind when you see all these years I was doing it on, the hard way. But trust me, when you do anything, if you understand the physical process of doing something, it transfers into digital in a very logical way, like layers in Photoshop.
Exactly.
Think of acetate sheets that you used to have on the overhead projectors. Well, layers in Photoshop is just layers of sheets with something on each of them. And if you want to move one, you pull it out and you put it on top. And that's how I approach design, is how would I do it if I didn't have a computer?
That makes sense, because even when you do Photoshop and photography and compositing, it's the same thing. If you didn't have computer, or if the lights were actually in that way, how would the light go around? How would the light put in? So talking about Ransom notes, you just talked about that, how every stuff is different. Every letter is different. Yeah. And I'm sure you went through this. I'm not sure because you're already a pro, but I went through it. And I'm hoping that a lot of people did, that when they get their hands on a software like this called Word or Photoshop, and they get to design a page, they use every font in one page. So talk about that a little bit. Did you do that? And what is the ideal number of fonts that one person should use in a page?
Okay, so yes, I was guilty of that, because the first time you get a computer and you see all the fonts, you just go through and like, oh wow.
And use that.
Yeah.
Use those funny fonts.
And the thing I found, which I would be a piece of advice to anybody, is if you're kind of serious about what you do, whether it's Photoshop or photography, and Glyn's mentioned it before, you have to look at the best work out there. So, I grew up with comics and magazines, and so you start to see, okay, I've made a dog's dinner of this, a complete mess. I've thrown the kitchen sink at it, and it looks awful. And then as you start to strip away and you look at something and you mimic. So I used to try and mimic something I'd already seen, and it's, well, they've only used one font here. So I'll try one font, maybe two. I would say for me personally, depending on what you're making, I wouldn't use any more than 3, but I generally find now, because fonts are so good, you can use one font and different weights of the font. So a nice big bold one. And also think about what you're creating. So if you was creating, say, a poster for a boxing match, you wouldn't use a thin font. It is no impact. You would for maybe a violin concert, but for a violin concert, you wouldn't use a big fat.
Exactly.
So there's consideration is, what's the font giving you? Because I know it sounds really kind of, what's the font? But quite often I will come up with a project purely from a font. I will see a font and I'll think that would be awesome for this kind of poster, and I would develop an idea just from having the font, and then kind of work from that. Is that font would be great for like circus poster, or because you don't have to make real life things. You can just make. I watch a TV show and I'll make a poster for the TV show or the event in the TV show just for fun. So you try a font.
So that's how you practice, right?
Yeah. And I go off fonts. I have a font at the moment, and then I never want to see it again.
It's like looking at the real, what do you call it? Real world stuff.
Yeah.
And get inspired from that. A lot of people today get caught up in the software. Which software I use, which font do I use, which color do I use? But then again, I would ask that. I mean, I've got a lot of questions from a lot of people. What is the software to use? Adobe Illustrator, InDesign, CorelDRAW. I mean, I'm sure each one of them has their different uses. So what would you suggest? How would you answer that question?
So, and I've had to learn this the hard way as well, because like I said, when I started, it was desktop publishing, which isn't a phrase that's used that often, but basically every magazine you pick up, every newspaper, every book, every leaflet at you come into the airport and you've got all these leaflets for things you're going to go and do while you're in Orlando. That's what I call desktop publishing. It's informational. Therefore, InDesign InDesign is the Adobe version of Quark, but way better. So InDesign is what I would use if it's very lots of typography. So if you're laying something out, it's a great tool because you can still go and retouch an image. Like, say we're looking out the window now, we're going to do an article about Orlando. We take the image, take the photograph, retouch it. I'll do that in Photoshop and I'll save it. And then say I'm creating a logo for your show and we're going to do a flyer about being interviewed in Orlando by yourself. I would make that in Illustrator, because what you find over time is when people use the wrong tool for the job, it makes it harder for the designer. And the times where I've gone to someone and said, okay, I'm working on this thing for you, I now need your logo. And they send me a Word document with a very small resolution logo that they want me to make something that's very big. And you can't do it. So Illustrator is vector, it's mathematical, so that means however small it is or however big it is, it will always print perfectly. You won't get that in Photoshop. But you can create logos in Photoshop because it does have vector ability with the shapes and type.
Exactly. But then again, it's much more convenient to do in Illustrator.
Photoshop's the Swiss Army knife.
Yes.
I can do everything in Photoshop.
Yes.
I can make a magazine. I could make a logo.
You can do 3D.
Yeah,
but
3D.
It's not made for 3D.
No, I can do video editing.
Video edit, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not made for video edit.
But if that's all you've got, you can get away with it. But if it's the proper tool for the job, you know, I would say you can hit a nail into a wall with the back of your shoe, but a hammer will do it quicker. Exactly. So if you know what the correct tool is, which is why I say to everyone, get Adobe Creative Cloud. Yes. Trust me, it will be the best investment you make. And I say to everyone, if you're good enough, you should be able to make $50, $60, pounds, whatever it is, in whichever currency you're using. Make that first £50, £60 and pay for that, and that justifies you owning it, because the Creative Cloud makes you creative. It makes you... Back in the day, you never used to have the software. It would cost so much money. Now it's at your disposal. Why not learn the other tools? Become a better designer. Get more work. Get more opportunity. There's more to learn. There's more content out there now.
The more softwares you know, the more you're in demand as well in the creative industry. And I'm sure he is not, and I'm not as well affiliated or getting paid by Adobe, but I'll still say this. You need to get into Creative Cloud. It's so amazing. And just for your information, if you're a student, you get 60% off.
It's a great deal.
I'm not pitching this as a salesperson. I'm not getting any money out of this. Full disclosure. But I bought Photoshop as a student. When I was in college, I applied as a student. I got 60% off and got the whole creative suite. So getting back to the Ransom notes, what are some of the most 5-6 go-to fonts that you use? All of us have that, favorite fonts that we always use. So what is your 5-6 go-to fonts?
That is like asking me to pick my favorite child. Because it's horses for courses. So I'm quite a fickle designer. So like I said, I'll have a font and I'll go off it. If I'm doing corporate work, if I'm doing something that's for a flyer, there's a font called Verb, which is a really cool font, and I bought it through I think it was a package through Design Cuts, which is a place where I get a lot of my resources from, and I started to use that, and I've used it in
How do you spell it so that people can find it? VERB. Okay. And
it has a huge family of weights. It's like condensed, italic, bold, like super bold. So if you can find it, it's not expensive. There's a few places where they still include it as a bundle, and you can get the bundle for about $29. That was a font I really liked. But since Typekit with the Creative Cloud, Typekit has really become so useful because I've got experience, and because I've got a lot of books, and because I look at a lot of things all the time, I know what I'm looking for, and when I see it, I know it's the right font. So like Glyn's new book, Photoshop Toolbox, there's a great font by a design company called House Industries, and it was the perfect font for the book. And so my favourite font will be the last piece of work I've done, because there isn't...
So if you have no favourite font, you can like any font, you can come across a font that you like.
Yeah.
So my question would be, if you're creating something, for example, you've been assigned to do, say, a pamphlet for, say, Photoshop World. So how do you go through the choosing font process?
The good thing is, look what else is around, because there's a couple of tools now that are like the Shazam of fonts, where you can take a scan of it, you can put it in Photoshop, match font. So you can sometimes look at one, find out what it is. Now, one piece of advice I would give on fonts, which a lot of people don't realise, is quite often when they're doing a project, if it's personal, you can go on places like Dafont, Dafont.
Okay, so that is...
yeah. Now, and that's where you'll find, I want a Mickey Mouse font because I want to do it.
That is so cool.
Now, personal project, fine. Commercial project, no.
Bleeding Cowboys.
Yeah. Typekit commercial fonts, a place like Font Squirrel are commercial fonts. If you are being paid for the thing you're creating, commercial fonts. If you just go on Google and look for a font and download it, that is the same as going on Google Images and taking someone's image. Fonts have licensing, and it's a thing that a lot of people get caught out by. Now, it's very rare that the likes of you and I will get picked up, but ethically, I've done it in the past. I've not realised, and it's an education. You learn, and because Typekit's included, they're all commercial. It's great, but it is one thing I'd look at and consider is. Look at what's around. Sometimes a perfect example would be I just wrote an article for Photoshop User Magazine about the Stranger Things title. Now, the font that they used called Bengwat, or ITC Bengwat, it was this guy who created this font. Now, it's quite expensive. I say quite expensive to buy the font. It's a price you'd pay if you definitely were going to use it. No, I wouldn't have gone and downloaded an unofficial version of it. But I went on Typekit and I found a font that was similar. And I did the project based on that font. But through research and understanding, I knew what that font was. And I knew I'm not going to spend like nearly £100 to download the font to do it for the magazine. But I found a font similar. So it's okay to find similar fonts. But it's a big thing to get into if typography is your thing or graphic design is your thing.
And also great way to find out fonts. Of course, I'm not sure whether you have used it, but in Typekit you have all those options of selecting the weights or selecting the width.
And you can type in the word. Maybe you're doing a headline or even a logo.
Yeah.
You can type the word in and it shows you what it looks like.
It shows you in every font.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about fonts and using all the fonts, what do you find some of the most common mistakes that designers do?
They use Comic Sans.
Let's and by the way, guys, there's a song about Comic Sans. If you haven't checked that, have you seen that song? You should go ahead on YouTube and search for Comic Sans song. There's a song made on Comic Sans. The whole song about using Comic Sans in your project.
I saw the Papyrus one. The Papyrus, the font Papyrus that's used in what's the Avatar.
Oh.
The film Avatar,
yeah.
The font they use is called Papyrus, and it's a very heavily overused font in the film industry. And the guy from La La Land, whose name escapes me, the actor, he does a spoof video about the use of Papyrus as a font. But the common mistakes are people use too many. They don't use the right font for the project. Mm-hmm. So again, it's that whole thing of impact. It's still telling a story. Fonts still tell a story. So the mistakes they make are they take the fonts they shouldn't be using, they don't use the right font for the job, and they use too many. And it's a thing you learn. You just have to go through that pain and learn it, like a photographer would, or like when HDR came out, everybody ramped the HDR up.
It was something like the HDR vomit. You see the line.
Yeah,
the white and the dark line increasing the contrast around the edge. That was too bad. So recently I got an email from Adobe, and I'm sure a lot of people got it, about trying the Adobe XD.
Yes.
So have you tried it? Have you experienced it? What is it?
So when Adobe XD came out, it was something because I had done web design before and using web in design. I'm not a great web developer, but I understand it. Mm-hmm. And when XD came out, it was quite exciting because I looked at it and thought, wow, awesome, because you can help you build apps. And I love the process of where you can create these multiple artboards, like that's new in Photoshop, that's always been in Illustrator. I like the artboard and connecting it. But I've not really got my hands dirty in it, partly because of time limitation. Is, you know, with a full-time job and a family and doing this other stuff that I do, XD hasn't been something I've needed to do yet, but it is very closely related to the job that I do, because there's a lot of vector artwork process that goes into XD and technology. So at the moment we're actually looking at XD at work because it does link into what we do, because people are creating artwork in Illustrator that's going into XD. Mm-hmm. So I'm coming at it from a different side. So it is a product that looks really good. And the fact that they've just made it free, a very low end free, like one project. But I think the future in Adobe XD is going to be really big. And I would say if you're into that kind of thing and you are a designer, I would strongly suggest you look at XD and see what it's capable of doing. It may not tick any boxes for you, but I think it's going to be very powerful from Adobe over the next few years.
It's like a lot of things in one software.
Yeah.
Solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot of softwares. Let's talk about a little bit about Dave. You've been in the industry for such a long time, started from the scratch, started from the bottom, now you're here. According to you, what is your most memorable and your favorite creation of all time?
I know what that is already.
What is that?
My favourite thing I've ever done is Glyn's logo. Because as we got to know each other, when he first started, he had this different logo, and we sat chatting, and I said, you know, I think as you're moving on now, we need to change your brand, because I'm a designer and I'm a marketer, and I love that admin side of the business. And we got chatting, and I said, look, this is what I do. I do logo design. So let me try and do something for you and see if we can come up with something. And I sat at home with my iPad and a pen and the pen for the iPad. And I always start with, if I do any logo project, I always start with a font. I start with the typography, and I look and see something.
That's a very
that
interesting approach. I wanted to get that across. Is this approach is really interesting. Starting with the font instead of searching for fonts later, right? That's interesting. Yeah. All right. So I
try and think of a font, and then I sit and kind of sketch in like GD. So I get his initials, and I'm trying to see how the G and the D can link. They've both like got a curve at the edge, so I can butt them up together. But one of the important things when you're creating, do it at the beginning or do it at the end. But I advise you do it at the beginning. Google it first, because you may not. You may come up something in your head that looks great, but there's every chance that someone else has had the same idea,
done it,
especially with typography. So I'm playing with this GD, and I'm trying to get it to link, and I've come up with a couple of clever ideas, but it just felt too overworked. So I thought I'd do it loosely. So I started doing the G, and because I was on the iPad, it's not like having a pencil and paper, because I'm a big fan of pencil and paper. So as I pulled the G round, instead of taking my pen off, it carried round, and I saw an eye and a nose. So I was like, interesting, let's just do the D and see what happens. And as I pulled the D and pulled the D over, all of a sudden I had the other eye and a head. And it happened to be a hairless head. Sorry, Glyn. But it looked like his face. So I took a screenshot of my iPad, and I still have it to this day.
Okay.
And I messaged him and said, Glyn, I've come up with something. You might love it or you might hate it. And I sent it over to him, and he just went, that is it. That is it. And I get so many comments from people who go, I love it, because they don't always see the face. They don't see that it's a G and a D. They see it looks like Glyn, and it's only when you say, but look at the letters, and it's G, D. It was like serendipity. And people have said to me, can you do me a logo like Glyn's? I'm like, no, I can't, because your initials are different, and I don't want to copy Glyn's. So personally, because he's my best friend, that piece of work for me is one of like the happiest moments, because I created a logo for my mate and who's doing so well. I mean, Glyn is killing it. And one of my other favourite pieces of work is Photograph Like a Thief book cover. So I've been lucky enough through the relationship with Rocky Nook is I've laid out the covers of all 3 books. But Photograph Like a Thief started out as a talk that Glyn did. And I think I'd be right to say, it developed from a talk he did called The Power of P, and it's kind of worked into Photograph Like a Thief. And we sat chatting about the title, and it was like, what do you think the book would look like? And myself, Glyn, and the guys from Rocky Nook all came up with the same idea at the same time. And it was a kind of retro 90s. It sounded like the name of a film, a 50s film. So I kind of went away, and already in my head, I had an idea what it would be, and I sketched it, and Glyn sketched it, and we sent each other, and we almost drew the same thing. Wow. It's like guy running away, he's got a camera. So I developed that. I did it in Illustrator, did it all properly, and I was inspired by the Alfred Hitchcock kind of posters. So I downloaded them all, developed the idea, picked the colours. So orange and black was very Alfred Hitchcock. The books photographed like a thief, so it was designed like a thief. And that's a very interesting thing. Photograph like a thief, and you design it like a thief. Yeah. I was inspired by a genre of film that I grew up with, that I loved, and I sent it over. And Rocky Nook went, it's very rare that we sign off a book design cover at first draft. You've nailed it. So those two pieces of work for me are my proudest of all the things I've done, because it's personal.
So I just wanted to ask you this, and this seems to be very interesting, is that if you had the ability, or if you had the power to create Adobe and all its softwares, like Photoshop and Illustrator, or like put in some features, what features would you like to have in there? What features would you put?
Okay. I think one of the first things I'd love Adobe to do as a company is, and I know the reason why it doesn't happen, it's because everyone thinks that the same team of boffins make all three. Like for me, InDesign, Photoshop and Illustrator, a lot of people think that one team makes all three, and they're not. They are developed by three different teams. The Illustrator team are in India and are an amazing bunch. Photoshop, I think, is in America, and I think InDesign maybe a mixture. I just wish they'd get all three to do the same things together. Even simple things like font size adjustment. If I'm in InDesign, if I've been working in InDesign for a while, I do like the fact that if I've got a font and I just want to tap it up a size, I go up to the top and I hit the little up or down arrow next to the font number. Yes. I like that control.
Yes.
But when I go to Photoshop, that's not there. I have to scrub, or I have to hit the up and down key on the keyboard. So why not just, if you do that in Illustrator and InDesign, why not have it in Photoshop? There's a feature in InDesign that I really love that I wish was in Photoshop and Illustrator, in the way that it works in InDesign, is if I bring an image into InDesign and I go to the color picker, I've got a second color picker which creates a swatch from the average colors of the image. So I go onto the image, I click on it, and it creates a swatch panel of the five strongest colors from wherever you've clicked on the image. And then you get a drop-down box, and you can select a different range of those five, like vibrant or pastel or darker. And then as soon as you've got the swatch you like, you click a button and it puts it in your swatch panel and it sends it to Creative Cloud Libraries. I love that in InDesign. I wish that feature was in Photoshop. I wish it was in Illustrator.
So you wish for the features which was in one program to be on the other programs.
To be shared. And there's one little thing that Glyn knows. I always ask Adobe this question, and it's such a simple thing, is you create something in Photoshop, and I get this because I get work sent to me from other people, and then I have to deal with their Photoshop and Illustrator files. And someone creates, say they get some 2 or 3 images, and then they create a smart object, and then that's in their layer stack, and then they send the file to me, and I open it up, and I don't want that layer object. All I'm going to do is right-click it and say, like unzip. Yes. So unsmart object it. Put it back to layers. But what I have to do is double-click it. It opens up in a new tab. I have to select all the layers, drag them back, delete the old smart object, and then, I don't want to do that. I just want to right-click and go release to layers. So I don't need new features. I just wish they'd get some of the existing features to be work properly or work across the suite. And but they come back to me and they say, you don't understand, the way they build Illustrator is different to the way they build Photoshop, and just because it works there doesn't mean it works there. We have to write a whole new bunch of code to make that thing happen. And I would say, but why didn't you do it in the first place? You know, you are the biggest design creative suite on the planet. I just make those things happen. So there's nothing new. I just want them to get.
We've got a lot of people complaining about Lightroom already.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why.
One nice thing in the new version of InDesign is there's now a feature where if you've got Photoshop keyboard shortcuts and Illustrator keyboard shortcuts, you can actually tell InDesign to use the keyboard shortcuts you use in the other two.
That is an interesting tip. And talking about that, we had this new feature, I'm not sure whether you're aware of it, I'm sure you are, about this variable fonts.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so do you use variable fonts? I mean, it's a completely new concept about changing the font totally, getting all those properties.
That was one of my favourite new features as a lover of typography, is the ability to, not all, you have to get a variable font. It doesn't work with all fonts, and you'll see if you look in the font list, it will say VAR, and that will tell you it's a variable font. So if you use that font, go into your project, and instead of having to keep going up to the type and pick the weight that you want and keep trying it, or you select the type and then you can flick through and see what it's like live. I love the fact that you can just move the sliders and just get that perfect weight, that perfect thickness, or the. And I love that Adobe keep pushing to make the product better and coming up with things that are useful. I mean, Puppet Warp in Illustrator, I see no need for, but works great in Photoshop.
Is it there in Illustrator? I just thought it was a Photoshop thing.
No, this is in Illustrator now. But hey,
it's okay. Yeah. Anyway, if they can put Puppet Warp, they can put the features that you want.
Yes.
That's more easier to put in right there.
Yeah, put the things I need, not the gimmicks.
So we just talked about the podcast, amazing podcast, He Shoots, He Draws. He's the He Draws, and He Shoots is sitting back there, chilling. So, I've seen you, whenever I see you or I see Glyn, I imagine you two together, always. I mean, it's what is this chemistry? I mean, how do you guys met each other, and what makes you a good team?
Okay, we met because of Scott Kelby.
Oh, wow.
He gets total credit for that. When I first joined NAP, we both joined NAP independently through looking for Photoshop Learning, and I started looking at things online, and I realised it was an American company, and I was buying the magazines, Layers magazine and Photoshop User, and was a big fan of learning tons. And I wanted to join, but you couldn't get the magazine in the UK. It cost twice as much. So I contacted them one day and just said, love what you're doing, but I wish you'd do more for the UK market. And they came back and said, well, what do you recommend? So I said, well, just a couple of things here just to make our life feel more included. Mm-hmm. So they offered me the role of being the evangelist, an app evangelist, which I took on full on. I created a website, I created a presence called NAP Member, and I was asking them to do things for me. So I saved up and I thought, well, I'll go to Photoshop World and I'll stand in front of Scott Kelby and go, I can come to you at great cost, so you come to me. So he arranged to do a seminar in London, and this was October 2010. And at this time, I didn't know Glyn. I was just part of NAP, and I'd become this new role. So I emailed Scott and said, look, I met you at Photoshop World. I don't know if you remember me. We met very briefly. I'm your evangelist. When you come over to London, can I have a coffee with you? Yeah. And he replied, Dave, I know who you are. I'm going to spend the day with you. By the way, there's another guy in England I know who follows my blog called Glyn Dewis. I've invited him along as well, and we'll go out for the day shooting. Now, bearing in mind, I'm not really a photographer, but I'm hanging out with Scott Kelby. Yeah. It's it's the man.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So I contacted Glyn, and I said, this is who I am, and Scott's coming over, and we're going to meet up. So we arranged to meet at Paddington, and we'd go and meet Scott together. And we already started kind of having a bit of banter and joking online, and it's I'll meet you at Paddington, I'll be wearing a floppy hat and a big flower. So already I knew, we had the same sense of humour. And we got on the train and we met, and it was like that. It was like the mate, instantly I've known this guy for years. Yeah. And we hadn't. And we got chatting, and we spent the day with Scott, and after that, as we got to know each other during the day, he's a photographer, I loved his work. And we both started with NAP, and we just kept in touch. and we just found that every time we spoke, it wasn't just a 5-minute chat, it would be an hour. And we come from different backgrounds. You know, he is a photographer, I'm a graphic designer, but I loved him as a man, his personality, and it was like the friends you've had for all your life. So we tried it. It took a little while, but I modelled for him.
Oh wow!
So he was doing a workshop.
I'd love to see the pictures.
Oh yeah, I'll send you the pictures. So
yeah,
and if you've got time for it, this is a really cool little story.
I'll put that up on screen.
Yeah. So
probably.
I decided, Glyn was doing workshops at the time, and I decided I'd go along to one of his workshops and saw what he did, and it was just hanging out with him. That's all I wanted to do. And then I think it was the second workshop, Glyn had this model, and he was had this picture lined up, and it was the guy from Spider-Man, the editor in the Spider-Man, James Jameson. Right, okay. So in Spider-Man, there's a guy that runs the Bugle, the newspaper, and he's kind of got short hair and a cigar.
In the movie, yes,
in the movie,
I'm very aware of it.
So that was the look Glyn wanted. So I'm going to go along to help, and Glyn messaged me the day before and says, my model's not turned up. And I've gone, oh, wow, what are we going to do? So he's gone, will you model for me? And I was like, no, I don't want to be in front of the camera, please. I've got no one else. So I got the gear and I went along and did the shoot with him. And we did this picture called The Editor. And it was the first time we worked together. And cut a long story short, The Editor became the front cover of 2 magazines, one in a photography magazine in Germany and Holland. It was the magazine for a big event in Holland at the time, so apparently my face was on a lot of things. And then it became a tutorial in Photoshop, practical Photoshop in the UK, and it started to get used, and people then started to see us working together. But we weren't working together, and it was a little while in before I did his logo. We were chatting more, but we just chat. I mean, the podcast was really, I know Glyn would have mentioned it, is we sit chatting, we share a room. Every Photoshop world, we've shared a room. We fly together, we share together, and we chat. And because we come from the 2 different backgrounds, it's a nice balance that I, as the non-photographer, can look back and see his world, and him as a non-designer sees my world. And we eventually found that we just work well together. And we talk a lot about the industry and the people we meet. We've got a lot of mutual friends. We do a lot more events together. And, you know, my career has kind of come along behind Glyn's. Glyn's like killing it. He's out there and he's built an amazing brand. And I'm just enjoying being in the industry, and I'm starting to teach more now. But, you know, I'm super inspired by Glyn. You know, you watch him, he's one take.
You know what's most interesting to me right now as you say that? I mean, it's so great that you guys work as a team.
Yeah.
You guys push each other.
Yeah.
And you've created this really great podcast together. And I've always wondered, I mean, there have been a lot of podcasts on Photoshop, photography created before, but please, could you just explain why is your podcast great? I mean, why is it number 1? Why do people like it? What is it then that you include in that people like?
I think it's hard to say why people like it. We can go on the feedback we've had. People like the fact that we're quite honest with each other, and we both understand the industry. So we're not just saying things for the sake of shock, because there's a lot of podcasts that, you know, it's like misinformation. People want to do something, but the background's not there. So the feedback we're getting is they like the relationship. They can tell we chat well together. We make each other laugh. We have that split in the industry that the same things affect us, but just in different ways. And because we chat about it, the podcast really helps us talk to each other more. It's an excuse to do something else together. So, and when we were deciding we chatted about, let's try doing a podcast. But if we do it well. So we release it on the same day every week. Good audio. Important. I know you're really, and I watched one of your things where you were talking about good audio, and your audio is great on your videos. So almost to the point, I think, like the mic is just a prop, and you've got this other great audio going on. But we really wanted to do a good job, because Glyn, if you know Glyn, nothing's done by half measure. He's either all in or not doing it. And
I mean, I love the amount of preparation you guys put in. I mean, a lot, much time ago, you put in that we are coming out with this, and then you post about it, and then you come with the website, you come with the logo. I mean, with full preparation, great quality, you jump in.
Use the tools you've got. You know, we've got experience that in abundance. I'm a graphic designer, so we were chatting about what would be the name. We were going to put it out there and get someone to recommend it. And then one day I was watching football.
I'm an amateur photographer, so I'll just pull up the exposure right now. I mean, it's the worst time to kind of shoot stuff, because in the evening the light changes drastically, the white balance changes, and everything seems to change. Okay.
Yeah, so
what were we talking?
So we were talking about we were trying to come up with a name, and I happened to be thinking about football, and there's a phrase in football called "he shoots, he scores," and like most things, like logo ideas.
Is it an England term?
It's an English term. It's just a phrase in English football, and I'm a soccer fan.
I'm hearing it for the first time.
Yeah, I'm a soccer fan, so football's in my background, and I like doing wordplay and trying to get things to work together, see if there's a new idea. And occasionally you have a moment of epiphany where you're like, oh, that's it. And they're great moments. You get a real rush from it. And I just went, he shoots, he draws. He shoots, he draws. Of course, he shoots, I draw. Glyn, what do you think? And it's like, mate, perfect, you've nailed it. So straight away, I got that, and in a really short amount of time, I'd drawn the camera and the pencil, come up with the logo, the colour scheme, and gone back and said, right, okay, what do you think of this? And again, Glyn goes, you nailed it. So that's what I love about that when we work together. If no one else likes it, it's fine. You know, it works for us, and we want it, it to be memorable, and we're having the best fun doing it. It's great because, as I say, we get to talk to each other more.
That's the thing. If we are having fun doing a project, it continues. Exactly. If you're not having fun, it just dims down.
Yeah.
So wrapping up, I always do ask this. I always think of audience as, if you're watching the video, it should be worth your time. So what is the one advice that you would give to graphic designers so that will really help them? Next, I mean, I know I've listened to your podcast that there's no next level.
Yeah.
But then
There's how many levels are there? How many secrets are there?
Exactly.
To take it to
a next level.
To advance.
Yes.
To keep getting better.
To really make to keep getting better.
Yeah.
Because you're never gonna be reaching that point where it's just gonna stop.
Yeah.
Or be perfect.
Yeah.
So how to be better? How to keep getting better?
So 3 words.
Okay.
Watch, listen, and learn.
Oh. Wow.
Okay. So look at what's around you. Look what's going on. Because if you blink at yourself and think you're the best and you don't want to listen to anyone, you won't get very far. Listen, take advice, talk to people, get feedback. Because now we've got social media at our hands, there's a lot of information out there, and you can 1 minute sit and watch, let's say, I mean, YouTube's difficult because there's a lot of bad advice on there, and people like yourself shine. You rise above that because you're consistent. But talk to people, listen to people who've been in the industry. Don't be so arrogant that you think you know it all. So like, watch, listen, and never stop learning. Keep learning. There's always new software. I say that I'm 52 years old. Creative Cloud is in my life. There are new things being added to Creative Cloud. When I think back to I worked with pencil, paper, Letraset, and cutting and glue, copying and pasting, I literally pasted stuff with glue. So there's evolution in design. So watch, listen, and learn. Don't be afraid to keep wanting to be better, and practice. Just practice. And get feedback. Create something, get feedback. Yes. Always ask a woman. They give the best feedback. Because if you ask your best mate, that's great, but I'll show my wife and she goes, really? You use that font? You know nothing about fonts. But get feedback. Just don't be insular. Be open and accept all the information that's around you, because you will become a much better designer. You'll become a better person in all walks of life. Those 3 words. Watch, follow that advice,
and learn.
Yeah.
As you said that, it reminded me of my laptop and my YouTube videos. As you see at the back of my laptop, you see my logo. I just cut it out of my business card and stuck it with a glue. And I'm not kidding. I didn't get a professional sticker printed from Vistaprint. Vistaprint has not sponsored this video.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank
being
you.
in the interview. Really appreciate that, Dave. And I know, mic holding stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so
No, thank
much.
you. And watch this guy. Watch this guy
Yeah,
because
you're
he's
probably
had a
watching
great
this
year.
already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If
but
it's
I'm
the
gonna
first
cut
time, if you're watching this because of me, watch him. Subscribe to his YouTube channel,
Please.
because this guy's going to be good.
Thank you so much for being in the interview. Thank you so much for watching this interview. I hope you had something to take away. And I'll see you guys in my next one. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you watch, listen, and learn. Thank you so much for being there.